Good morning, sir.
Hello,
Hi, sir. Good morning.
I am all set to go. Receiving a feedback echo.
Sir,
Yes,
sir, we would like to begin our meeting with a welcome address, and I'd
please.
like to welcome Bini, sir, for the welcome address.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Binish, our HOD, Miss Anju Varki is on leave, but she is attending the meeting online. And I am here on behalf of her and all the department and JP Arts and Science College. And when we published the notice on the webinar series and we posted it on our walls in our status,
Yes,
many have asked, wow, you are lucky to have Dr. Palakkeel, especially one sister from Kuttikanam, and her father is Sebastian Sir. He was a teacher at Arivithara College, and
yes,
she,
yes,
sir, do you remember him?
yes. I remember her also.
Yeah, and she asked, and special regards to you from
Yes,
his daughter, sister Italia.
yes.
Okay, so we are so lucky to have this webinar series and really glad to you and on behalf of all the students, teachers and Department of English and JP Arts and Science College, let me accord a warm welcome to you, sir. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you. It's so nice of you to put me in touch with uh, very dear people from my remote past. Actually, I remember
Okay,
Italia
sir.
as a little girl.
Yeah.
So can you all see me?
Yes, sir. Well,
I am getting some feedback. Can mute all the mics out there.
Sir,
Okay.
is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. It is still getting feedback. Okay. All right. I think that's good. Once again, greetings. I am so pleased to be with the students and faculty of JPM College, Labbakkada, Kattapana, high ranges area. It is not coincidental that the location of your college is associated with colony and colonization. Human beings moving around, settling down, looking for land, cultivation, farming. Colonos actually means farmer. So in some ways, our talk is related to farmers and land. And in the long history of the development of civilization, human beings moved mostly in search of land to farm. And human civilization itself finds a breakthrough in farming and agricultural life, life moving away from hunting and gathering to farming and settlement. So in a basic level, we cannot find fault with the human beings moving around all over the world. Travel is in our blood. Travel is us. If we did not travel, we would still have been living in caves. However, travel also implies coming across other people who are also traveling, and the failure of understanding and acknowledging other colonists, other farmers, other farms, and there you have the origins of conflict, massive human conflict. So I'm going to present a PowerPoint and then use the PowerPoint to navigate some of the complex issues that have arisen from travel, colonization, farming, and also in the meanwhile, nations form, nations acquire great power. Power is a word that you all hear a lot in English classes. Power and knowledge, two categories that Michel Foucault, the French thinker, post-structuralist thinker, who in a way taught theoreticians in the West, beginning in early 50s, 60s, all the way to 83, I think that's when he died. And in a big way, he opened up some new pathways for thinking about human history, human conflict, birth of ideas, birth of institutions, etc., etc. So the PowerPoint will just help me in organizing my thoughts. Otherwise, I could probably go on and on forever. Are you able to see the PowerPoint? Are you able to see the PowerPoint?
So we are looking for it.
No.
Yes, probably slow kicking in.
Yes, sir. Now
Yes.
it's visible.
Okay. So post-colonial, yeah. I am getting the feedback.
Okay,
again.
sir. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Okay. All right. Let's go. Yes. Post-colonial literatures is relatively new nomenclature for engaging colonialist discourse on the societies and cultures that came under European rule. So European rule is actually the common denominator there, although I mentioned that all cultures, human beings in all corners of the earth are moving around. If you think about Malayalis, we all try to run away from home. We find employment in Coimbatore, then Chennai, then Mumbai, and we spread out like that. Eventually, we ended up in Malaysia, Brunei, and places like that. Before long, we were in working in the Gulf, and then America opened up in the year 1964, after the civil rights legislation, when they decided if they created a nation thinking that everyone is created equal, and that everybody has the right for the pursuit of happiness, they could not stop Asian people of Asia from becoming immigrants. You may have heard that after winning the Nobel Prize, Rabindranath Tagore applied for a visa to visit America. And he was turned down for the visa because he was of Asian descent. He was a brown man. Eventually, he made it. He actually came to a university very nearby our university. So that particular anecdote is often repeated, especially in the post-colonial discourse or debates and critiques about nation formation and the nations trying to curtail human movement. So when I was asked to speak to your students, I was given a number of topics. I chose Renaissance, Enlightenment, and post-colonial literatures because they are all part of the same phenomenon of Europe and its others. Europe finding itself and struggling to define a mode of coexistence in a place that had become very rigid under a particular ideological system. So in the two previous talks, I charted the trajectory of that struggle, the struggle for human dignity. One of the paradoxes of that great struggle and the great accomplishment of the Enlightenment that I charted in the previous lecture was that the same great thinkers, I am talking about Hobbes, Locke, Hume, including Milton, Newton, all of those thinkers did not think people outside Europe were eligible for equal justice. And to some extent, they could not even see them or recognize them. And many of them, although they created philosophical systems that unraveled terrible systems of inequality, but they themselves were not willing to or able to grant equality to people of Africa. Even the great Albert Schweitzer, the great Christian thinker, missionary, doctor, doctor in Africa, and a grandfather of Jean-Paul Sartre, I think. So he even he thought that the Europeans were elder brothers of the Africans, and the elder and more educated brothers of Africans. even Karl Marx himself, who wrote extensively about the collapse of bourgeois industrial capitalist culture, and equated colonialism to that particular phenomenon, he seemed to think that English colonialism, English rule in India was good and necessary. We may get into that topic later on. So all I'm trying to say about this particular opening slide is that there is a great paradox, and the great thinkers who created much of the redeeming ideas were not themselves free from bigotry, racism, narrow-minded racial superiority. So I also want to ask one more question, do we need to think of ourselves? Do we need to think of ourselves united? Ourselves in the, I mean, people who are not Europeans, people who are not part of European descent. By the way, 85% of the earth, 85% of the surface of the world, of the earth, was colonized by European people by the end of 19th century, 85%. England alone controlled 1/3 of the earth at that point. So, so keeping European hegemony as our topic, using English language, which we inherited from them. I myself make a living as a professor of English in a largely Europe-centered culture. So it's a very complicated question, but we can start asking whether it is time to have a counter discourse on colonialism, and also ask whether there is an inner colonialism, whether we are colonized ourselves. We have subjected ourselves to colonization. I remember about the time I was leaving India, Ashish Nandi, you may all know the name Ashish Nandi, very important, maybe the first major thinker in India to use Ericksonian psychoanalysis to study not only the psychology of individuals, but also the psychology of cultures. And he published this path-breaking book in 1983. It was called Intimate Enemy. Intimate enemy means we are our enemy. We are our colonizers. We are our own oppressors. For many years, I thought I could write an essay following that particular theme, and my insight was that we became our own enemies because of our caste system. The caste system that we are not even willing to discuss. Even if we are willing to discuss, we are not willing to abandon it or disown it in any substantial way. So my naughty idea at that time, which I decided not to pursue because I do not have enough knowledge of sociology or anthropology or even psychology to pursue that thread. But my naughty idea was that since we understand caste and we put everybody in their place, and we feel at home in our place, you know, and that goes to gender also. So we put the English rulers as super Brahmins. So we have the Varnasramam, topped by the Brahmins, and then the moment the Englishmen showed up, we established them. We created a new caste for them, and gave them privileges, and assigned you know, untouchability distances. I remember 36 feet away from Brahmin if you are a Nair, etc. You know, 96 feet away if you are an Irava, etc. So I'm kind of laughing about it, but that may very well be one of the problems in Indian counter discourse on colonialism. So let us just see what the MG University syllabus wants me to do. So I'm very impressed by the post-colonial syllabus. I see that the syllabus includes a whole module or a semester worth of work on post-colonial fiction, another one on poetry, and I think there is a third one on theater, etc. If nothing, the rise of post-colonial literature, post-colonial discourse, post-colonial theory help in universities in opening up the curriculum. When I was an MS student at Pala St. Thomas, we only knew the English. I had never heard about Afra Ben. I had never heard about Elizabeth Phillips. I had never heard about Amelia Lanier. Never heard about Margaret Cavendish. Never heard about Mary Wollstonecraft. So we have come a long way, and for all these radical rethinking of the canon, I would say the post-colonial theoretical effort that started off in India, actually, and then it caught on in England and in America. And now it has become one of the preeminent modes of literary analysis in the Western Academy, and glad to see that is also the case in Mahatma Gandhi University, and I trust other universities elsewhere. So how did so the syllabus requires that I ought to help you with for framing the conceptual context for post-colonial, and the readings for this particular module is the very famous textbook. Are you able to see this book if I show it? right? Are you able to see this book?
Yes, sir.
Do
Yes,
you
sir.
all have a copy?
No, sir.
Okay. Uh, it is Empire Writes Back. Empire Writes Back. It was published in 1989. My copy is from 1989. So before this book, there was no coherent pathway for anybody to enter the this area of study in any coherent way. So we are asked to, so I have been asked to give you a basic rundown of this, the first chapter of the book. And as you may have guessed, Empire Writes Back is a line from Salman Rushdie, who said, "Empire writes back to the center." You may remember that Empire Strikes Back was Star Wars #2, I think, Star Wars movie, which had caught the imagination of the world in a way in that particular age. So as a parody, Rushdie said Empire Writes Back, and they used it as the title, theory and practice in postcolonial literature. So I highly recommend that you remember that title, and particularly that phrase, the Empire Writes Back. Empire Writes Back. Yeah. And a few years later, Ania Lumba published a Feminism, Nationalism, Postcolonialism, which was a very sophisticated analysis of the development of the field, and primarily from a feminist perspective. Remember, I just rattled off the number of great women writers in the English tradition that I had never heard of. So beginning in 1970s, thanks to feminist thinking, as a part of the legacy of Virginia Woolf, the canon was opened up. If you look at the bottom of the slide, I have included some key concepts. Canon, and essence and essentialist, discourse, hybridity, hegemony, subalternity, mimicry. These are all the key words of postcolonial literary analysis. Essence or essentialist, discourse or discursiveness, etc. Hybridity, canon, hegemony, subalternity, mimicry. So I know most of you will have an exam to take. So I want to encourage you to be aware of these terms and be conversant with the deeper implications of those terms. And also, I will briefly discuss an essay by Homi Bhabha, who has, and Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak together, both Indian professors, roughly 10 years older than me. When I arrived in America, these people, both of them were already very well known and revered for their theoretical work, and they were all associated with the very high level upper class American institutions. So right at the beginning, postcolonial studies although it was about the poor and about the brown people and about the oppressed and tortured in places in Africa and Asia and South America, much of the talk about it was at places like Harvard and a very highly privileged environment. And that was one of the reasons I decided not to try to get into that field. I didn't want, I didn't feel welcome in the field, to put it mildly. Although, whenever I wrote something, I was able to publish them. There was an openness toward the idea. And after Empire Writes Back in about 10 years, it became an integral part of every university curriculum. I myself was asked to develop a course, but instead of following the theoretical path, I created a course at our university, and instead of thinking about post-colonial, I tried to take our students to the origins of Indian tradition. So our class, our students read the 800-page Mahabharata, and I worked with them on reading the Bhagavad Gita, and the Buddhist scriptures, and all the Bhakti poets, and we read Kalidasa, etc. So I took the opposite position, but never ignoring the theoretical framework, and I will discuss some of that as we proceed. So again, all I'm trying to say is only in a very specialized universities, courses like these are easily available. In our university, we can only offer one course every 2 semesters, etc. So coming to the key concepts, let me start with the idea of essence and essentialist. I want to say that I trace my intellectual or philosophical education to the moment I understood this phrase or the distinction. And that happened only in my late 30s. Until then, I only understood essence the way most people understand, fundamental, essential, important, etc. But it has very specific meaning. So it may not be an overstatement to say that post-colonial thinking, feminist thinking, deconstruction, Marxist thinking, and all other theoretical literary analysis rejects the existence of essence. So what is essence? Essence is a Platonic term. A Platonic term that implies essential qualities, universals, in other words. For instance, beauty with a capital B, beauty. Love with a capital L. Chair with a capital C. So the philosophical idea is that the Platonic idea is that everything in this world is a copy of the original essential, be beauty, be, love, etc. Which is the idea that the writers of the Gospels and the church fathers and everybody who developed Christianity borrowed this Platonic idea that there is a sacred, something that you could call a supernatural ideal form. The word idea itself is essence, idea, world of ideas. If you see a book with the title World of Ideas, means that is the abstract, universal, supernatural, maybe even spiritual reality that exists on a transcendental plane. In our context, the white people, the Europeans, started to claim that the Western civilization, Western ideas are essentialist and the universal, of universal value. And that, so when I remember discussions in English classes about universal value of certain classics, universal value of Shakespeare's works. So post-colonial and post-structuralist thinkers will reject that beauty with a capital B exists. It denies it. So in other words, there is no spiritual or sacred thing called beauty that exists outside of material realm. By the way, if you have heard about Plato's allegory of the cave, if you are able to leave the cave, then you enter the world of universals, world of ideas. You see the true source of light. You have true knowledge. And in India, in the Hindu tradition, philosophical tradition, we talk about terms like Brahman, Atman. All of those are essentialist ideas. All are Advaitam is a belief in a universal essence, Brahman. So that is at the turn of and that was attacked by Enlightenment thinkers already. So in a very concerted manner, any objective thinking, positivist thinking, scientific thinking philosopher, literary theorist would say there nothing that is essential exists. So what exists? If there is no pure white culture, if there is no pure Shakespeare that is universally valid and relevant, then what do we have? So Homi Bhabha, whom we'll be talking about, said what we have is hybridity. We don't have anything pure. We only have so remember, Nazis claim that they have racial purity. They are essential Aryans. They're not mixed. So an idea like pure would be questioned by post-colonial thinkers. So instead of pure, you have hybrid. I'll come to that later in some depth. Another term associated with this, that the pure and the essentialist, the powerful cultures, white cultures. Christianity also thinks of itself as essential. Truth with the capital letters, word made flesh, word in capital letters, etc. In the beginning was the word became flesh. Whoever wrote it, that is a gospel, by Gospel of John, it would have been borrowing from the Platonic idea. So hegemony is the aggressive power that essentialist forces apply on the poor and the oppressed. Hegemony. So in England, if you think about it, during the 200 plus years when the English ruled India, English literature, English church, English people, English law, etc. exerted hegemony over Indians. Even after the English left, we experienced the same hegemony. I remember as a boy feeling that I needed to learn English. Feeling that English was better and powerful, etc. So hegemony is an idea presented very convincingly in the prison notebooks of the Italian Marxist thinker Antonio Gramsci, who was imprisoned by Mussolini. Hitler, etc. would have been ardent supporters of essentialist belief in the power and value and the rights of the white race. So Gramsci's idea was that hegemony is a kind of cultural belief that the powerful can use on the powerless. The powerful no longer needs to, beat you with a lathi or shoot you down or put you in prison and make you obey. They'll just make you nice by using their hegemony. So you will come across this term a lot. Otherwise, check it out and be prepared for the long road ahead if you plan on developing as a scholar of English literature or any literature. Subalternity is, hybridity is the idea by Homi Bhabha. Subalternity is the idea by Gayatri Spivak. So two Indian thinkers who created, who contributed in a massive way toward the creation of an important critical discipline. So what is subalternity? By the way, subaltern also comes from the prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci used the term, subaltern means a lower class soldier in the army, subaltern. So if you are a lower class soldier in the army, what do? You just obey the orders. You don't have to think. You obey. So Gayatri Spivak used the term subalternity, and especially in her famous essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? She's created a framework for explaining why in India, even during the independence struggle, we were so respectful of the English. And I will be reading or discussing a couple of short stories and poems in the way I would discuss them in class here. Mimicry, everybody knows that term. It is a very low class level of humor, right? So anybody, again, mimicry is also a term that was theorized by Homi Bhabha, but articulated most powerfully in a novel by V.S. Naipaul, who is arguably one of the first major post-colonial intellectuals and artists to think about it. But he would not be accepted by any of these thinkers because of being accused as essentialist, as an essentialist supporter of Western ideas. That is, I doubt that is a valid accusation, but that is okay. So in his famous novel Mimic Men, an Indian origin politician in Trinidad, who after setting up a kind of revolution in Trinidad, ends up being in exile in England, and trying to get along in a white culture, pretending to be a supporter of Enlightenment ideas, in a way, a mimic of the powerful class. By the way, that's one of the most powerful English novels that I have read, Mimic Men by V.S. Naipaul. Okay, so we'll also quickly discuss Chinua Achebe's essay, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Remember, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad is, or used to be, a classic work of English literature that everybody read. I read it in college. I read it again in America. And I had a professor who thought that was the greatest novel ever written. And Francis Ford Coppola made a great movie based on it with Marlon Brando called Apocalypse Now. And it's a great, I don't think we can be dismissive of the work, but one of the consequences of post-colonial thinking was that everywhere classics, this is a sculpture of German classics created as an installation art, starts with the Goethe, Brecht, Mann, etc. So if when I was studying in India, if we had a sculpture like that, we would have Shakespeare as the foundation, and then Dr. Johnson, Marlowe, etc., all the way up, and you'll not see a single woman writer there. It would have been entirely men. So in America, it would have been the same. All the important books would be English writers, not even American writers. So the very first consequence of postcolonial literature was that canon. Remember the term canon. So what should we study in college? What should we read? So MG College syllabus is an excellent example of a revision and rethinking of canon and a new canon formation. So canon formation transformed English Academy in such a way that the powerful, again, the essentialist people, in America, the essentialists are the Republicans, the Trump people, etc. Usually the American government, Kissinger, etc. You may have heard that Kissinger saying the difference between Western civilization and everybody else. For the Westerns, we had our Isaac Newton. Indians didn't have Isaac Newton, or Chinese did not have Isaac Newton, etc. So that kind of essentialist thinking, when university after university started to include novels and poems by Black people and Chinese people and Indian people, Native American literature into literary study, one United States senator publicly condemned this move and the change, and he called it the decline of the university. And he went on to write a petition asking government funding agencies to deny teaching postcolonial literature and postcolonial theory, etc. Because what do they want instead? By the way, before postcolonialism existed, universities in America and England and Europe, they still studied Asia, and the name for that particular discipline was area study. So if you go to any university, it is not uncommon to see somebody who would identify himself or herself as a China specialist, or an India specialist, or an Africa specialist, or a Russia watcher. I remember going to Delhi in my college days, and a friend introduced me to a number of people whose profession was Pakistan watching. So the senator said, are you trying to talk? Anybody?
Yes, sir. We have lost our connectivity. Could you
Okay.
please wait for a minute? We have lost our connectivity.
Should I wait? Let me know when it works.
Sir, it's okay now. You can continue.
Okay, all right. So I feel free to interrupt me if necessary, and I have a lot of ground to cover.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
You can continue.
Okay. I looked for a work of art that explains what a postcolonial critic or a postcolonial analysis implies in a classroom. For instance, as you can see, this is a work of art by Mary Sibande. It is she's a South African artist. As you can see, you have a servant woman, African servant woman, and she is looking at a white woman. The portrait of a white woman. If you have a portrait, that means you are a very important person. So the servant is pulling away the fabric, unraveling the portrait. So the black servant undoing the white control, the white legacy. So remember the term hegemony. You may all remember that Nelson Mandela was in jail for 27 years in his own country for criticizing and fighting for dignity for Black people in South Africa. And then they had this law, an essentialist law called apartheid. The Black people who were born and raised there for generations were disenfranchised by the colonial settlers, and then they created laws that reduced them to individuals without any rights in their own country. So postcolonial literature is in that sense empire writing back, or the servant undoing the portrait of the rich white lady, unraveling it. So just a quick look at why we needed to unravel. What is the consequence of colonialism all over the world? In Ireland, in the year 1845 to 49, a potato famine broke out. 1 million people died. Macaulay Trevelyan, who was the administrator, in the future he would become the administrator of Madras. He ordered that no assistance be given to the Irish people, and he allowed 1 million people to die in Ireland. So that was colonialism. You may not think of Ireland as a colony. Ireland was just like America, a colony for the English. Scotland was basically a colony, and Australia was their colony, and India was a colony for over 200 years. And you all know the number of famines. I have written an extensive essay about it on the extent of famine in the during the English rule in India. Just the well-known famine, the Bengal famine in 1943, 70 ലക്ഷം ആളുകൾ പട്ടിണി കിടന്ന് മരിച്ചു. So same kind of phenomenon. I already mentioned apartheid, and then in America, only in the year 1964, Black people could travel in the bus with the white people. Black people could not drink from the same water fountain. I already told you, Rabindranath Tagore could not get a visa to America. So these are some of the examples. I can go on and on about it forever, but just to remember some of these kind of details. So that's why somebody will try to unravel it. Why did it happen, or how did it happen? And here you have a map of the world in 1914. I don't know whether you would have enough clarity about just grasping it. It's on the internet. It's actually a live map on the internet. You could see how colonialism spread. I already told you 85% of the face of the earth was, by the end of the 19th century, Europe controlled. Europe took advantage of. I do want to say that this is not an unusual phenomenon. Europe itself was initially very brutally taken over by Southern Europeans, basically people from one particular village. They just grew and grew and grew. In 600 years, they became an empire. They became the Roman Empire. And they conquered Spain. Then they conquered what was then France. They conquered Belgium. They conquered Germany. Finally, they arrived in England in the year 53 BC, 53 years before Jesus. They arrived in England, and England was just a forest with some tribal nomads living in various isolated settlements, basically Celtic settlements. So they eventually rule England for about 400 years. And then as the empire begins to fall, they withdraw. Then tribal people who lived in Germany, northern Scandinavia, they moved in. You may know the names: Vikings, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Alemanni, Goths, Vandals, Ostrogoth, Visigoth, etc., etc. So this is how the world was created. People moved around. For instance, Vikings, they lived in Scandinavia. So the only thing they knew was to build a ship. And they would all winter, they would work on their ship. And the moment the snow melted, they would travel all over the sea coast. And if they came across any human settlement, they would go there and kill everybody and take their cattle. And that's how that culture lived. One of the groups that landed in northern part of France in the 7th century, they were not able to go back because of an early onset of winter. And they managed to survive there, and the local Frankish chieftain allowed them to cultivate land, and they became Normans. In the next 300 years, they would go on to conquer England and change Anglo-Saxon England into Anglo-Norman England, medieval England, etc., etc. So all I'm saying is this kind of massive human displacement, the Mongols, the Ottomans, Vijayanagar Empire. You all know our story. And in the year 1632, Muhammad died. In the 100 years that followed, Islam spread all over the Middle East and even took over half of Europe. Islam reached all the way to Poitiers. Karl Marx, who analyzed this phenomenon, said there is a distinction between the kind of massive human movement and the European colonialism. European colonialism was a capitalist colonialism. It was about saving money, making a lot of goods and selling and making profit and saving the profit and banking goods and services, selling slaves, etc., etc. So I'm not sure you are familiar with the range of colonialisms. We are only talking about English language based postcolonial theory, but English language based postcolonial theory that originates in Edward Said and Baba, etc., Foucault, that also spreads into Francophone and Latin or Spanish postcolonial discourse, and they all have very important political point of view and political history that makes it relevant for them. I don't know whether we are familiar in India with the images of the horrific capitalist enterprise that was slave trade. So it was inevitable that the empire had to write back. Mahatma Gandhi, who charted the same path through South Africa, etc. You know that story. So that's what colonial enterprise was, and here I want to just give you a glance of the extent of it. First World War, 25,000 Indian soldiers died. Can you imagine? Indians did not have to go and fight in Europe and elsewhere to support the English. And in that war, about 40 million people perished. It was ultimately about who controlled what colony and what part of the earth. It was just a skirmish about, this sphere of control of the German Habsburg-based Germans and the England-based Anglophone forces. And the same thing, same kind of phenomenon, Russian Civil War, 8 to 9 million people died. Stalin, which was a consequence of Russian revolution. Slavery existed in Russia all the way to the final years of the 19th century. Pretty much everybody was a slave except the ruling class. And then Second World War, 71 million, and this goes on like that. Japan is a particular example. Japan in the mid 17th century encountered Saint Francis Xavier, Jesuits, Christianity, and then immediately the guns arrived, the Spanish and Portuguese arrived, so and the Dutch, and the Japanese decided to shield themselves from the West. And they managed to do that for 250 plus years. In the year 1863, I think, American Navy went into Japan and bombed them and installed a puppet ruler. So this kind of this kind of thing happened in China. So massive aggression perpetrated perpetrated by European people, essentialist belief in Christianity, Enlightenment, science, and then using that to kill people and control people. So that brings us to the post-colonial question about whether it was necessary. In India, I have heard people say, if the English did not come, we would have been still living in a terrible caste society prior to 1920s. We've talked about Kerala Navothanam, etc., Kerala Jnanodayam, etc. So by 19th century, the English especially started to say that they are in India or they are in Africa. Just it was their mission. They are bringing civilization. They are in India because Indians are cruel. Indians burn their women. Wives have to commit suicide. Widows have to commit suicide, etc. So huge political question. So one of the early thinkers of post-colonial ideas was Aimé Césaire. He claimed that colonialism brought not a single human value. Not a single human value. Because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to jump a little bit. Still, 50% of English people believe that what they did in England, in India, benefited Indians. Prime Minister David Cameron says, of course, we did something wrong, but on the whole, it was good. We gave you railway. We brought you Shakespeare. You all speak English now. Look what you have done with your English. But economists who have studied this particular era tells us that there was no per capita increase in India in the 200 years of their rule. Literacy remained at 12%. Cameron could have said that there would have been zero literacy. Utsa Patnaik has calculated that England may have stolen $45 trillion worth of goods from India. By the way, the GDP of America is only 21 trillion a year. Also remember, India was not ruled by the English crown until after the First War of Independence. Until then, India was the private property of a company, East India Company. It was founded in the year 1600. Anybody who bought shares in that company for £1, by the end of that century, they had made 200,000 pounds. I don't know whether I should spend any more time illustrating what colonialism was and the extent of it. Although my father told me that he never saw, he grew up in the 1930s and 40s, never saw an Englishman. Although there is a story that one of our neighbors was shot and killed by an Englishman. So that is probably the extent of our familiarity with the English rule. We were in Travancore, indirectly ruled, etc. I already mentioned Ashish Nandi. Remember one of the first psychological analysis of why India became so much in love with the British, and what the English thought they were doing in India. So Nandi attributes all of it to what is called a Protestant ethic, because the Protestants thought of all of us as children, child people, and they wanted us to grow up. And even in England, they put children to work. If you're 10 years old, you had to work as chimney sweepers and work in coal mines and assembly. One of the first humanitarian laws produced in early Victorian England was they created a law saying if a 10-year-old kid doesn't have to work for more than 12 hours. Can you imagine? 10-year-old doesn't have to work for more than 12 hours. So we have come a long way, and I want to give a shout out to Salman Rushdie. His novel Midnight's Children could be thought of as the first major self-conscious postmodern, post-colonial novel. And he also wrote a book of essays in which he questions the essentialist ideas even before Homi Bhabha was able to publish his work on that question. So the idea that nobody is special, nobody is essential, nobody is racially superior or pure. Remember, even in the seconds that I spend on describing how Europe was populated and repopulated and languages and cultures changed, you would think England is an ancient culture. England doesn't really exist. If you start unraveling the fabric, it is just a blend. It's just a fabric that you can unravel. So think of Salman Rushdie, especially his idea that we are also exiles. So did India even exist before 1947? The idea of nation? If we start analyzing nationhood, national geography, our boundaries, the peoples who live, so we are not essential pure, we are all exiles. We are all migrants. We will be in America today. We'll be in Gulf tomorrow. We'll be back in Kerala tomorrow. We might be working in Bengal tomorrow. So the fluidity of the human condition beautifully illustrated in that novel. I only passingly mentioned Edward Said. I would have liked to spend a whole hour talking about the importance of this book, Orientalism. In basic terms, the argument is that Westerners who studied the Orient, the East, he studied, sorry, the book Orientalism is a beautiful, powerful, wide-ranging critique of the Orientalist study of India's Upanishads, India's original documents. They studied, people like William Jones studied all the scriptures, and you know about Max Muller, Hermann Gundert. These are all the people who created a body of knowledge. The French did the same with Africa. The Germans also worked in India. All of that knowledge, by the way, we might have even lost a lot of that knowledge if we didn't have, at least these are the Orientalist works are the ones who we have available. You may know the work Sacred Books of the East, edited by Max Muller. So the argument is that the Occidentals, white people, studied Oriental sacred books and Oriental historical documents and created a self-glorifying cultural essentialism. Remember that term essentialism? So instead of being just a bunch of people from England or Germany, they presented themselves as capital letter people, almost supernatural. And lot of the great writers we studied, including the greats, the Greeks, Dante, Stuart Mill, Cardinal Newman, Ruskin, Dickens, Flaubert, Conrad, all of these writers, Edward Said analyzes and reveals the inherent discourse that they are performing in the interest of Western political institutions. In other words, everything they did looked like a great scholarly work about India, but the purpose of it was to establish Western hegemony, the term I used before. So also our students, please find a copy of this online somewhere. Thomas Babington Macaulay, in the year 1835, wrote a white paper or minutes on the question of how the East India Company might be.
Sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, there is a connectivity issue
Okay.
here. Could you please wait for a few minutes?
I will.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
how much more time do I have?
Sir,
Do you need
sir,
to?
am I audible?
You are audible, but I hear some.
You can take your own time, sir. No problem.
Okay. So shall I continue?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. I'll try to wrap it up. This is a very important slide. I want to encourage students to remember this particular document. It's available online. Thomas Babington Macaulay in 1835. It is because of this document that you are studying English. It is because of this document that English education becomes institutionalized in India. And so why did they decide to start English education? And this is only a quotation from a segment. After a long discussion about the need for the English to create a new class of people in India who could rule in the name of the English. Remember, I told you that my father had never seen an Englishman. Very few English people were able to rule this vast country using nothing more than hegemony and guns, some guns, and dividing local rajas, etc. So they did not have enough people to run India. They had to rule Australia, New Zealand, various locations in Africa, etc. So they decided the company was going to spend some money to start some colleges. So the question was, what should the Indians learn? Should they learn Sanskrit or Arabic? He's talking about Sanskrit or Arabic because Macaulay doesn't know about any other languages. Not that we have extensive language systems that would have been easily recognized by somebody like Macaulay. So he says, but he says, I have done what I could to form a correct estimate of their value. So somebody's claiming that I don't know Sanskrit or Arabic, but I have studied about these languages, and I've talked to the Oriental scholars. We talked about the Orientalists, right? Oriental scholars, and many of them distinguished by their proficiency in Eastern languages. I am quite ready to take the Oriental learning at the valuation of Orientalists themselves. And then comes the passage. I have never found one among them who could deny that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Take that. Totally clueless, right? Mahabharata alone is 8,000 pages long. 200 plus very special Upanishads and commentaries and various Purana texts, Bhakti texts, the Urdu text that Persian and Urdu texts that developed, Bengali texts that developed. So all of them he's saying they are not as valuable as a single shelf of a good European library. And then intrinsic superiority. Remember the term essentialist? This is another term for it, intrinsic superiority. Essentialist superiority of members of the Western literatures. So the essentialist superiority of Western literature is indeed fully admitted by those members of the committee, support the Oriental plan for education. So because of this letter, they decided to start teaching English, and English was embraced by the Savarnas of India. And then people like Narayana Guru said, if you really want to engage the world, I don't advise that you study Sanskrit. You better invest in English. So this is a crucial moment in Edward Said's term. It was an Orientalist moment. It was a record of Orientalist thinking. And you see the same in Karl Marx. I already mentioned that Marx, in spite of the astute economic analysis and philosophical insight, he thought colonialism is a progressive force in India, bringing modernization to a backward feudal society. Marx actually wrote a whole book. I have a copy of it, which I bought in Pala in 1980. It was only two rupees or something like that. It's called The First War of Indian Independence. Back to the Empire Writes Back for a second. A writer named Gauri Vishwanathan, who had already published a book, Masks of Conquest. By the time I arrived in America, she had published this book, Masks of Conquest. And the burden of the book was that English literature was an ally in maintaining ideological control of the primitive natives. So the white men used the Shakespeare to beat us into obedience. That is the point. I'm going to skip some of these. This is the very first chapter of the Empire Writes Back. The varieties of national and racial kind of subtext in this particular field. At one point, there was no real name for it. By the way, American literature itself is post-colonial. By even in the at the turn of the 20th century, in American universities, they did not teach American literature. They only taught Shakespeare and Milton. When I arrived at our college, students had to take one course in Milton, one in Chaucer, and one in Shakespeare. And within a couple of years, we toppled Milton and Chaucer. And and kept only Shakespeare. So, so this kind of phenomenon. So one of the other varieties was Irish literature is post-colonial literature. Australian literature is post-colonial literature. Nigerian literature is post-colonial literature. Although within these traditions, a lot of Irish writers don't want to be known as post-colonial writers. They just want to be English writers. And in the way V.S. Naipaul didn't want to be Commonwealth writer or a post-colonial writer. A race-based Black consciousness model. I see that MG University has included a number of novels and plays that come in under that category. And the previous term for this particular field was Commonwealth literature. If you studied at the institute at Hyderabad in the 80s, all the way to 80s, you are likely to have come across Commonwealth literature scholars, not post-colonial scholars. So Commonwealth literature was a project created by the British Council to continue the hegemony. American literature, which came into its own after the Second World War, wanted to become even more important than English literature. So American Embassy in the early 70s invited pretty much every English professor in India to a hotel in Simla and wined and dined them and gave them books. And that's how in India, American literature became a paper for your study. When I did my BA, I had to study, I had 2 or 3 papers of American literature. So American government basically using CIA money, Green Revolution money, paid for the textbooks. By the time I had to buy the American literature textbook, it was only like 5 rupees, very cheap even at that point. It used to be free. So what I'm trying to say is that the hegemony work continues. Political powers will try to control because world late capitalism has a way of existing outside the national boundaries. And of course, thematic parallels. You all probably know Kantapura. Achebe is no longer at ease. Naipaul's very famous House for Mr. Bishwas. And again, slowly, only after Homi Bhabha's idea of hybridity, Salman Rushdie's claim that nobody is essentially pure or racially pure or special, and that we are all exiles, we are all just wandering around on the face of the earth, we would all be a sorry sight wearing masks before long. That is the moment when the term post-colonial became a blanket term for a wide range of fields. Ania Lumba, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. She's one of the readings for feminism, nationalism, postcolonialism. So if she's my Facebook friend, and she and her husband are both very well-known scholars in the field, and their writings are easily available online. So I highly recommend their work. I want to move away from theoretical ideas to some literary works. Just quickly look at it. Rudyard Kipling, everybody knows, Kim, Jungle Book, etc. Rudyard Kipling was born in Mumbai and raised as an Indian boy. Kipling is arguably one of the most revered writers in the English-speaking world. If you go to any American home, you'll see pretty much every one of his books. And the older generation are able to recite his poems. The Ballad of the East and West is often quoted, especially this first line. Oh, East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. This line seems to present the ideology of the white essentialism. However, only this line is quoted mostly. Salman Rushdie has a book called East and West, I think. The rest of the lines go like this. Never the twain shall meet till earth and sky stand presently at God's judgment seat. Oh, until the judgment day, whites will remain whites, the Easterners will remain Easterners, etc. But there is a but. But there is neither East nor West. So this is recited in America often. But there is neither East nor West. There is no border. There is no breed, no birth. So this line seems to be that Kipling is an Enlightenment white English poet who is saying that looks like there is disparities and prejudices and suspicions and separations between East and West, and which will last until Judgment Day. But in reality, there is no East, no West. There is no border. In India, we in India know what a border means, right? Border skirmishes. No breed. We in India has never heard that one before, right? No breed, no birth. So, and the lines go, when two strong men. So when is no East and West? When two men stand face to face. No women. No chance for women. Two men, two brave men stand face to face, though they come from the ends of the earth. So that is an interesting stanza. The ideology, if you were to use postcolonial literary analysis, line by line, the ground shifts, ideology changes. and people can selectively quote and say these two together, or then you could quote the third line and have another meaning, and all of those together, the meaning shifts to two men, two strong men. In this case, military men, two military men, face-to-face enemies. Maybe you may have seen the parade at the Wagh border of India between India and Pakistan. So it's a long ballad. I am not going to bore you with the whole thing, but basically what happens, it's a ballad about two men, the son of a colonel and a thief named Kamal. Kamal, so son of the colonel and Kamal's son. So two boys. And Kamal's boy steals the colonel's horse and flees, and runs away beyond the border. So the tribal thief, chieftain's son, gets away with the horse, and colonel's son grabs a female horse, a mare, and he follows the boy. He follows for about 20 miles into supposedly enemy territory. And after about 20 miles, the poor female horse faints and falls down, and the colonel's son, by the time, grabs a gun and fires, but the other boy escapes, and then the Kamal himself appears and grabs the gun, and finally the fainted horse gathers herself up and walks toward the boy. At the sight of this animal loyally approaching the colonel's son, Kamal, the tribal Indian, brown Indian man, and a boy, said, you go ahead, you take the horse and you can go. So the boy says, my father's army will come and kill you. So they have an argument about that. Finally, the boy gives, the colonel's son gives his gun to Kamal. Kamal sends his boy to accompany colonel's son back to the camp. So the poem ends like this. The colonel's son, he rides the mare, and Kamal's boy the dun horse. And ha done, said the colonel's son. Put up the steel at your side. Last night you had struck at a border thief. Tonight it's a man of the guides. That may not be very clear to you, but basically what happens is, as you can imagine, the English army would have invaded Kamal's tribe and killed Kamal. But in a noble way, Kamal had sent his son, and when the border guards tried to stop the brown boy riding along with the white boy says, this brown boy is my friend, and he is going to be a British soldier, etc. So what do you think of this poem? This poem is beloved in America, and I suspect in English-speaking world. this would be considered a great poem about how noble human beings are, or how noble men are in spite of war and conquest. But the very end of the poem, that the only good Indian is, in America there is a saying, only good Indian is a dead Indian. Likewise, only good Indian in India is the Indian who serves in the English army and dies for the First World War in the Indian army. So this is a typical colonialist, Orientalist poem, which is still revered in India, in England and America at least. So why would Ashish Nandi, remember the book I mentioned, Intimate Enemy, he spends a lot of time analyzing intellectuals and artists like Kipling, and even more so the Indian 19th century Indian thinkers like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and Nanabai Navroji, Rajaram Mohan Roy, etc., etc. And in all of them, he finds a psychological, a Brahminical willingness to accept the English Enlightenment as the ultimate value. And on Kipling, he thinks Kipling saw in India what he calls the Dionysian, as Indians, as human beings in a state of savage, noble savage innocence. Indians are idyllic, for instance, idyllic childhood associated with the years of safe delight in the rural India garden of India as a garden before the fall, etc. The 600,000 villages, peasants, all of them glorified, especially having known the horrors of England and all the wars and all the lists that I have rehearsed before you prior to that. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak is the other most important name, and you have to read the long essay Burden of English. Gayatri Spivak is very hard to read, but this essay is easy to read. It's pretty beautiful also. She discusses what is the use of studying English other than possibly getting a job. And hers is a very nuanced answer. And she thinks of the title of the speech, burden, in the sense of a song or a melody of a song. So the burden of English, she sees within the English language a silken thread that is empowering for us. But typical deconstructionist that she is, she's also thinking of the other burden, the white man's burden. So double meaning. So a second language as an instrument and as literature. One of the one of the most touching moments in her long essay. I highly recommend it. It's free online. If anybody needs a copy, I can send it to you also. Burden of English. It's pretty long, but it's worth reading. In that essay, she introduces and rather tastefully discusses a range of literary works and teaches us how to read them for the burden of English, which is the music of English and the English as a tool of empowerment. The best part of it is a reading of the famous Tagore story, Didi. I don't know whether you're familiar with it. It's a strange story. In Didi, elder sister, story about a middle-aged Bengali woman. She's kind of middle class. She has a little bit of land. Her parents had a lot of land, and her husband would have inherited all that land. So because of that possibility, her husband didn't do anything. He was kind of, fitted around this time. And then suddenly, in their old age, maybe in their 50s, Didi's parents had a surprise child in their old age. And the moment, pretty soon after the little boy was born, the husband gets nervous because he was hoping to inherit the wife's property. Now a little kid is born and he's going to inherit it. Before long, both parents die, and the elder sister has a new baby brother, whom she spoils rotten. It is a beautiful story, just the description of how a woman in her late middle age suddenly becomes a special being in the way she adopts the child as her own child. And then the husband, who was kind of, because of this, he was working away some time, and he also starts scheming to annex the property that should go to this boy when he grows up. The boy grows up a little, maybe 5, 6. Then whole hell breaks loose. There are court cases. Somebody else steals the property. So Didi goes to court. And in the lower courts, where Indians are the judges and lawyers, they are very dismissive of her. And so she goes to the highest court. She even threatens to write a letter to Queen Victoria. There is a moment in the story, this illiterate woman, the English reaches the English judge and asks for his help. So remember, the gist of the story is that a poor Indian woman is totally helpless before her husband, before her own people in her own village, and she finds refuge in the English governor. The last few moments in the story goes like this. The governor understands what she is telling him, and says, but he says he won't be able to help her. And then she asks him to take custody of the child. She asks for the judge's help in the safekeep of her little boy. And guess what? The sentence goes like, with a slight smile, the Sahib gave in. He agreed to take away the skinny, dark, serious, calm, gentle, mullet-wearing Bengali boy. If you think about it, it's a strange story. In some ways, it illustrates everything we have been talking about. In India, the English thought they were bringing civilization, justice, enlightenment, railroad, language, and they were even preserving our Mahabharata and our Upanishads and translating them. And in this woman's story written by none other than Tagore, the only source of stability and dependability is the Englishman. And with a smile, he winks at her and takes custody of the boy because her own husband or any of the neighbors or any other lower courts would help him. So, what I'm trying to say is maybe post-colonial literature, theoretically, it may be a black and white issue, but there may be greater nuances, and a similar situation arises with the very well-known Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Chinua Achebe, the great African novelist, Chinua Achebe, author of Things Fall Apart, he has this to say: Joseph Conrad was a thoroughgoing racist. That this simple truth is glossed over in criticisms of his work is due to the fact that white racism against Africa is such a normal way of thinking that its manifestations go completely unremarked. I think of Heart of Darkness as a very important work. The part I read is about Kurtz pronouncing or summarizing entire Western civilization in just one word: horror. He says it twice: horror, or horror, which is alluded to in T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. So Mr. Kurtz, in Heart of Darkness, the Congo colonial trader who had gone berserk as a murderer in the jungle, he pronounces the gist of Western tradition itself as horror. But in a different moment, Conrad describes a group of black natives in a boat and says, "Fine fellows," and then in parentheses, in dash, cannibals. Cannibals in their place, he tells us pointedly. So Achebe is taking Conrad to task for failing to see the common humanity I want to read a short passage from the original essay. In my original conception of this essay, I had thought to conclude it nicely on an appropriately positive note in which I would suggest, from my privileged position in African and Western cultures, some advantages the West might derive from Africa once it rid its mind of all prejudices and began to look at Africa not through a haze of distortions and cheap mystifications, but quite simply as a continent of people, not angels, but rudimentaries, not rudimentary souls either, just people, often highly gifted people, and often strikingly successful in their enterprise with life and society. V.S. Naipaul also has written about this book and Conrad in general, and he was also dismissive, except for the final moment with Kurtz. Not even the detail about summarizing all of Western, his experience as horror. Instead, Kurtz was reading, or Kurtz had a copy of a book about navigation, and it was a very thumbed copy, and the full title of the book is included. And Naipaul thought that was a beautiful high moment that summarized Western civilization, an interest in something like navigation. Anyway, so I think I have gone on too long. Maybe you can ask me some questions. I will point out two poems. By the way, postcolonial criticism is one thing. I already mentioned that it is practiced within sociology, political science, history, gender studies, etc. So it has radically transformed the academy. It has been a source of fear among politicians. I may have mentioned earlier that not many students are coming to study English in our university. And there is an argument that it is because we are teaching them stuff like postcolonial literature, not Shakespeare enough, etc. Anyway, so I want to read two poems for you, two very important poems that illustrate the importance of English for us in India. Even though, if you remember that letter by Macaulay, it is humiliating and horrifying, but it is a fact that English is swallowing up everybody else. And Rushdie himself expressed it in so beautifully in Midnight's Children, in the way he has swallowed up English and reshaped it and defined it in his own image. So here we have a very well-known Tamil poet who was one of the first to gather some fame in America as a professor of English, R. Parthasarathi. And my tongue in English chains, I return after a generation to you. I am at the end of my Dravidic tether, hunger for you unassuaged. I falter, stumble, speak in a tired language, wretched from its sleep in the corral, teeth pallid, lips still new to its agglutinative touch. And now hooked on celluloid, you go reeling down plush corridors. I could have written this poem called Malayalam. My tongue in English chains I return after a generation to you, Malayalam, etc. You don't have to take my word for it. Kamala Das Madhavikkutti, in one of her very first books, wrote, this is a segment from her book. It's called An Introduction. Don't write in English, they said. English is not your mother tongue. Why not leave me alone? Critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you. Why not let me speak in any language I like? The language I speak becomes mine. Its distortions, its queernesses, all mine, mine alone. It is half English, half Indian. Funny perhaps, but it is honest. It is as human as I am human. Don't you see? It voices my joys, my longings, my hopes, and it is useful to me as cawing is to crows or roaring to the lions. It is human speech, the speech of the mind that is here and not there, a mind that sees and hears and is aware. So Didi, who went to the English magistrate, Kamala Das wants to be left alone and to speak whatever she wants to mutter. Or Parthasarathi, who's feeling chained and jailed in English, feels set free to speak a choral, but his teeth, pallid lips are not quite coming back. And Gayatri Spivak, speaking about the burden of English, the music of English, and the prison house that is the language. All of these together form this great work of unraveling our old masters. Remember the idea, there is no essence, no essential master, there is no essential nation, there is no essential value either. Everything is constructed in the here and now in the world by human endeavor, which was actually one of the Enlightenment insights. But paradoxically, in the same age that invented the philosophical reason for being tolerant of other religions, the same age got rich on slave trade. But in another 100 years, they were able to pass first legislation banning slave trade. We live in Travancore where, slavery existed. Nobody wants to talk about it. We don't like to talk about caste, do we? With that, I want to conclude that final statements would not have been possible if I had not read postcolonial theoretical work. Thank you.
Sir, we have a question.
Yes.
Sir, I want to ask you a question. See, my knowledge of history is very poor, but still I think the Canadian islands were colonized by the French. Is there any fundamental difference between French colonization and English colonization?
It was all brutal. Yeah, it was stealing the land. Even Orientalist writing was similar. There may be some minor distinctions, but it was ultimately, as I remember I mentioned that the distinction between earlier settlements and movement of tribal populations, Celtic people moving, Germanic people moving south, etc. That was purely looking for land, and they were not going back. And they became the nations where they settled. Whereas in the English, it was a middle class merchant phenomenon. It was a mercantile phenomenon. It was a product of a late capitalism. And it was all about making money and getting something for nothing. $45 trillion worth of property stolen from India. Caribbean was English were also in the Caribbean. Yes. Other questions?
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, could you please explain the term negritude?
Negritude?
Can you explain the term?
Negritude, is that, did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, negritude.
That was one of the earlier iterations of postcolonial studies. Before there was the term postcolonial. The proponents, it was basically about African racial consciousness. And Frantz Fanon, Albert Memmi, Aimé Césaire, etc. So they were creating a new model of literature. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o even suggested that all African-centered writers ought to stop speaking or writing in English. They should write in their native languages. In India also, there was an occasional discussion like that, we should not write in English. And even now, writing in English is frowned upon by regional writers. Although Amitav Ghosh recently was awarded Jnanapeedam, which was a first event of that sort. So it is connected to the term Negro, which is a term that is no longer used. So negritude itself goes out of fashion right there. Other questions?
Sir, do you believe in spiritual reality?
If anybody who rejects essentialist thinking will not be able to believe in spiritual reality. What what is possible is accepting it as a language, accepting religion and spiritual life and spiritual models of existence as a symbolic engagement with the meaning of life. So this is one of the early questions raised, and even in America that this is raised, this kind of post-colonial thinking, feminist thinking, rejection of essentialism. Essence rejects religion and traditions. No, not at all. But it is understood as a human phenomenon, as part of cultural self-expression, etc. Yeah. Have I answered?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
So with this, we come to the end of our session. And I would like to welcome Ms. Anshu Varki, our head of the department, to convey the word of thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Anju Miss, for inviting me, and thank you also for putting up with me. I keep talking too much. I should control myself.
Sir, respected Dr. Thomas Palakkeel, Associate Professor of English, Bradley University, USA, Dr. V.V. George, Principal, Professor Rosanna Davis, Mr. Silas Matthew, Program Coordinator, teachers and dear students, good morning to all. Dear Dr. Thomas Palakkeel, actually we are so blessed to have you as our department mentor and our visiting faculty. On behalf of the Department of English, JPM Arts and Science College, I feel immense pleasure to take this opportunity to especially express my deep regards and gratitude to Dr. Thomas Palakkeel, who spared the time from his busy schedule to grace the webinar series with extremely relevant topics such as literature of the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and post-colonialism. And we request you to take more sessions in future for our students. Thank you so much, dear Thomas Palakkeel, for your kind consideration. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir, excuse me, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
So we have one more question from Rosanna, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
No, sir, our academic year is coming to an end by the 31st of March. Academic year comes to a close by the 31st of March.
Yes.
Academic year is coming to a close.
Oh,
So,
yes.
So I don't think we will have any more sessions this year.
You know,
I don't know about.
Yeah. Thank you. I probably won't be able to join you for some time, but it has been a pleasure. And please tell your students if anyone needs help, I will provide.
Yes, sir. Let me.
Could you please? Sir, could you please send the notes that you have prepared for the classes in our mail?
Yes, I will. I did not prepare notes for this one, but I prepared some notes you asked for. I'm still writing it, and I will send it to you.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, and it was in fact a wonderful journey to Renaissance, Enlightenment, and post-colonialism. So hope to see you soon again. Thank you so much, sir. Take care. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, sir.
Too late.
Bye-bye.
Too late.
Bye. Bye.